Some people spend their entire lives living for people who were never really watching. They wake up early, choose the right career, follow the safe path, smile when expected, nod when told what success should look like, and somewhere along the way, they forget to ask a simple question. Whose life am I actually living? Maybe this feels familiar. Maybe you've said yes to things that quietly drained you. Maybe you've followed expectations that never felt like your own. This is the story of a man who did everything society asked of him, until one ordinary afternoon, when a simple question from a stranger forced him to confront something he had avoided for 20 years. And when he finally said no, everything changed. But what happened next, nobody expected. At 5:40 every morning, Daniel Mercer unlocked the glass doors of Riverside Public Library. The building always smelled faintly of old paper and floor polish. The air was cool, quiet, predictable. Daniel liked predictable. He was 39 years old and had been a librarian for nearly 15 years. Not because he loved it, but because it was respectable. His parents loved telling people about it. Daniel works for the city, his mother would proudly say. It sounded stable, responsible, safe. Exactly what society admired. Daniel adjusted the stack of returned books on the counter and glanced through the tall windows. Outside, the winter morning was still dark, streetlights glowing against a pale sky. His coworker, Linda, arrived carrying a coffee. "You're early again," she said. Daniel shrugged. Habit. What he didn't say was that going home early meant sitting in silence. 3 months earlier, his wife Emily had moved out. The divorce papers were still somewhere on the kitchen table. The strange part wasn't the divorce. It was what Emily said before leaving. She stood in the doorway with a suitcase and said quietly, "Daniel, you're a good man." He waited for the rest. "But I don't think you're living your own life." At the time, he laughed it off. Everyone lived the same way, right? Work hard, stay stable, avoid risk, be respectable. That's what adults did. But lately, that sentence echoed in his head every morning between the library shelves. You're not living your own life. The strange thing was, he wasn't even sure what that meant. One Tuesday afternoon, the library was nearly empty. Rain tapped softly against the windows, and the fluorescent lights hummed above the quiet reading tables. Daniel was shelving books in the philosophy section when a young man approached the counter. He looked about 20, backpack, headphones around his neck. "Excuse me," the student said. "Do you know where the career books are?" Daniel pointed to the aisle behind him. "Third row, left side." The student nodded but hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" he said. Daniel looked up. "Sure." The student glanced around the empty library. "Do you like your job?" The question caught Daniel off guard. "Well, it's stable." The student smiled politely. "That's not what I asked." Daniel paused. For a moment, neither spoke. The rain grew louder outside. Finally, Daniel said carefully, "It's fine." The student studied him for a second. Then he said something simple. "Because I'm trying to figure out what to do with my life." He gestured around the quiet library. "And I'm wondering if this is what people mean when they say success." The words landed heavier than Daniel expected. Success. Fluorescent lights. Silent shelves. 15 years. The student nodded politely and walked toward the career aisle. Daniel stood there holding a book he hadn't placed on the shelf. For the first time in years, an uncomfortable thought appeared. What if I built my entire life around other people's expectations, and never once asked what I actually wanted? That night, Daniel didn't turn on the television. The apartment felt colder than usual. Rain streaked down the kitchen window while the clock ticked loudly above the fridge. He opened a drawer looking for a pen and found something he had forgotten. A folded notebook page. Emily's handwriting. He unfolded it slowly. It was a list. At the top she had written, "Things Daniel used to love." Below it were 6 things. Sketching buildings. Road trips. Fixing old furniture. Cooking new recipes. Talking to strangers. Starting projects he never finished. Daniel stared at the paper. He had almost forgotten. When they were younger, Daniel constantly started new hobbies. He built shelves, restored a chair, drove across 3 states on a spontaneous trip just to see the ocean. Somewhere along the way, he stopped, because stable people didn't take risks. Stable people stayed safe. He sat down at the kitchen table. The room was quiet except for the ticking clock. 4 years he had followed an invisible rulebook. Choose the sensible job. Avoid failure. Don't embarrass yourself. Make everyone proud. But there was another truth he had ignored. Studies show that nearly 70% of workers feel emotionally disconnected from their jobs. Daniel whispered to the empty room. 70%. It wasn't just him. Millions of people were quietly living lives chosen by expectations. He looked again at Emily's list. Then he noticed something written at the bottom. A sentence he had never seen before. You used to say yes to life. I hope one day you say yes again. Daniel leaned back in the chair. For the first time in years, he asked himself a dangerous question. What would my life look like if I stopped living for everyone else? The next morning, Daniel arrived at the library early as usual. But something felt different. The silence between the shelves felt heavier. Linda walked in with coffee. You look tired, she said. Didn't sleep much. She sat behind the desk and glanced at him. Everything okay? Daniel hesitated. Then he said something he had never admitted out loud. I don't think I belong here anymore. Linda frowned slightly. You've worked here 15 years. I know. People would kill for this job, she said. Benefits, stability, retirement. Daniel nodded. That was the problem. Everything about the job made sense, except the way it made him feel. Later that afternoon, he watched a father helping his daughter pick books about space. The girl laughed excitedly while the father explained planets. Daniel suddenly felt an unexpected wave of regret. 15 years. Shelving books about lives he never lived. Dreams he never tried. Fear tightened in his chest. What if Emily was right? What if he had spent his entire adulthood playing a safe character instead of being himself? For the first time in years, Daniel didn't feel calm. He felt terrified. Because the truth was simple. Living for society had protected him from failure. But it had also protected him from living. 2 weeks later, Daniel sat in his car outside the library before work. The sun was just rising. Soft orange light stretched across the empty parking lot. It was the quietest moment of the day. The moment where decisions felt possible. Inside his backpack was a folded piece of paper. His resignation letter. He had rewritten it 5 times. Every version sounded irresponsible, reckless, unstable. All the words society used to describe people who stepped off the safe path. His phone buzzed. A message from his father. Remember, stability is everything. Daniel stared at the text. That sentence had shaped his entire life. He closed his eyes. Inside his head, 2 voices argued. One said, be responsible. The other said, be honest. He walked into the library. The building smelled the same. Paper. Polish. Quiet. Linda looked up from the desk. Morning. Daniel nodded. For 2 hours he worked normally. Returned books. Answered questions. Shelved novels. Then at 10:17 a.m., he walked into the office and placed the envelope on the desk. His manager looked up. What's this? Daniel took a slow breath. My resignation. The room went silent. You're serious? The manager asked. You have benefits here. Security. Daniel nodded calmly. I know. Then why leave? Daniel paused. For a moment he almost said something safe. But instead he told the truth. Because I've spent 15 years saying yes to everyone else. He exhaled slowly. And I think it's time I finally say no. 1 year later, Daniel stood in a small workshop behind a cafe downtown. Sunlight streamed through dusty windows, warming the smell of wood and varnish. On the workbench in front of him sat a half-finished oak table. A customer had asked him to restore it. Daniel ran his hand across the smooth surface. He now repaired and restored old furniture. It started as a hobby. Then neighbors began asking for help. Then strangers. He wasn't rich. His schedule was unpredictable. Some months were harder than others. But something had changed. One afternoon, a young man entered the shop. He looked familiar. It was the same student who had asked about career books in the library. "You remember me?" the student said. Daniel smiled. "Yeah." The student looked around the workshop. "You left the library?" Daniel nodded. The student grinned. "Good." Daniel laughed softly. For the first time in many years, his life didn't look perfect. But it finally felt like his. There's a quiet truth many people discover too late. Living for society is safe. But safety is not the same thing as fulfillment. When every decision is made to impress others, something inside slowly disappears. Your curiosity, your voice, your direction. Daniel didn't change his life overnight. He simply made one powerful decision. He stopped saying yes to expectations that didn't belong to him. Sometimes the bravest word in the world isn't try. It's no. No to the wrong path. No to the life that looks right but feels wrong. And here's something worth remembering. If you reclaim just 2 hours a day, that becomes 730 hours a year. Almost 3 extra months of life to build something that actually matters. So here's something you can do tonight. Write down one expectation in your life that doesn't truly belong to you. And ask yourself, what would happen if you finally said no? Let me know in the comments.